They call me the ghost of the desert. Some say I'm still alive. Others whisper I died long ago. But this is my story, the story of how I saved my brother, and lost myself. I was 7 when the bandits came. My brother ran, and I stayed behind. I thought they'd let me go, but they didn't. They took me, made me work, carry water, clean their camps, live in dust and silence. For years, I was nothing but a shadow. Until I met her, a girl with eyes dark as night and a smile that burned like fire. We were opposites, she, born of darkness, I, of light. Together, we learned to ride, to fight, to survive. And that's how my story began. I remember my childhood not as a chain of days, but as the glow of the night sky that was always above me. We lived in a small town in the desert, proud, stubborn, standing like an island in a sea of dust. Everyone knew everyone, and even the wind seemed to whisper our names. The air smelled of smoke from the stoves, dust from the roads, and the cornbread my mother baked in our little kitchen. During the day there was always work. I helped my mother carry water from the stream, fed the chickens, sometimes ran barefoot over sand so hot it burned my feet. My father was the sheriff, and even at home he seemed like a man on duty, always in his best, always with a gun at his belt, always stern and watchful. I did not fear him, but I knew he belonged not only to us, he belonged to the whole town. But I belonged to my brother. Thomas was 2 years younger, and he was always afraid of the dark. At night he would call me, beg me to hold his hand. Astria, he would whisper, it's dark. The bad dreams will come. And I would smooth his hair, whisper back, look at the sky. The warrior stars are watching. They're stronger than any dream. He believed me. His small fingers would cling to mine, and I felt that for him I was more than a sister. I was his shield. When the sun went down, the town quieted. People came home, someone played a guitar on the porch, someone mended a wagon, and I would lead Thomas outside. We sat on the steps, and I showed him the constellations. See that one? That's the hunter. And those 3? They guard him. They never leave him alone. His eyes widened, and the fear slipped away. He didn't need proof, my words were enough to make the world safe again. I was just a child, but even then I knew, sometimes even the smallest light can stand against the deepest dark. I loved that feeling, the thought that I could protect someone, even if it was only from his own nightmares. And I loved the stars. Loved them so deeply that I often thought they loved me back. Long after the town was asleep, I would stay outside barefoot, hair tousled by the desert wind, staring at the sky. I imagined another girl up there, looking down, and somehow we were holding each other's gaze across the void. I didn't know then how quickly everything would change. I didn't know that the stars I loved so much would become my only refuge, when fire and gunshots tore my childhood apart. But for that moment, I was still only a 7-year-old girl, the daughter of the sheriff, who loved her brother and feared nothing, as long as the stars still burned above her. The night it all ended began like any other. Supper eaten, the lamps low, Thomas curled beneath his blanket with me at his side. He drifted off quickly, soothed by another story of stars that never failed. I watched his chest rise and fall, steady as the desert wind, and at last my eyes closed. Outside, the desert was quiet. But quiet never lasted long on the frontier. It began with a sound that did not belong, a low rumble, too heavy to be thunder. Then came hooves, sharp and merciless. A shout split the night. Windows rattled, dogs barked, and gunfire cracked the silence apart. I woke first, heart hammering. Thomas stirred, eyes wide. What's happening? He whispered. I pulled him close though my hands shook. The door burst open. My mother's hair was loose, eyes wild. Run! To the river! Behind her, my father strode past, revolver gleaming, never looking back. I seized Thomas's wrist and yanked him toward the back. He stumbled, tears starting. Astria! Don't stop. Hold on, I ordered. My voice was sharp, steadier than I felt. Outside, chaos. Flames on the general store, riders with masks and rifles flashing in firelight, smoke choking the air. I dragged Thomas behind the chicken coop, down the rocky path. He tripped, scraping his knee, but I pulled him up. "You're fine. Keep moving." My chest burned with fear, but I wouldn't show it. I was his shield. Behind us, voices rose. A rider had seen us. Hoofs thundered closer. Thomas turned to look, but I forced him on. "Don't look back." The stream glimmered faintly ahead, but the sound of pursuit was nearer. I knew if we kept running, we'd be caught. And in that terrible moment, something changed. I stopped being only a frightened child. I became what Thomas needed, a wall against the dark. I shoved him forward with all my strength. "Go," I whispered. "Run, Thomas. I'll be right behind you." I did not die that night, though part of me wished I had. When the rider's shot rang out, darkness swallowed me. But I woke not in the arms of my family, nor beneath the stars I loved. I woke in the filth of the bandit camp. My hands were bound, my feet blistered from the march, and around me the smell of sweat, horses, and smoke filled the air. The world I knew had ended, and a new one, harsher than any nightmare, had begun. They did not treat me as a child. To them I was neither girl nor sister, not even a person, only labor. From sunrise until deep into the night they drove me like a mule. I hauled buckets of water from the stream, so heavy my arms burned with each step. I cleaned their boots and guns, scoured pots blackened with fire, gathered wood until my fingers bled. I fed their horses, brushing snarling beasts that stamped the ground as though they despised me as much as their masters did. I slept little. When my body gave out, I collapsed in the dirt beside the fire pits, only to be kicked awake before dawn. My hands blistered, my back ached, my eyes stung with exhaustion. I was 7, but within weeks I felt 100. The men laughed at my weakness, and the women in the camp turned their faces away. I was nothing to them, just a scrap of the world they had stolen. Every day I thought of Thomas. Was he safe? Did he still remember the stars I had shown him? My heart ached with the thought that he might believe I was gone forever. And perhaps, in a way, I was. But even here, I refused to let the desert swallow me. At night, when the camp fell quiet and the fire smoldered low, I would crawl to the edge of the camp and tilt my head back. The stars were still there, cold and eternal. They were the only familiar thing left. I whispered to them, as if they were old friends who might carry my voice across the sand. And yet, the longer I stared, the more I feared I might never be free again. The weight of the camp pressed down on me. My childhood had ended in the roar of gunfire, and what replaced it was chains made not of iron, but of work, exhaustion, and despair. Still, I endured. I carried water. I gathered wood. I cleaned, scrubbed, hauled. I endured because somewhere in me, a small flame refused to go out. A flame fed by memory, of my brother's hand in mine, of my mother's voice calling us to supper, of the stars I loved so much. The bandits thought they had broken me. But they were wrong. I was still alive. And as long as I could look up into the night sky and whisper to the stars, I still belonged to myself. For a long time, I believed I was invisible to them, a shadow made of work and dirt. I carried, I cleaned, I fetched, I obeyed. Most of the bandits didn't look at me twice, unless to bark an order or shove me aside. And then one evening, when the sun sank red against the canyon walls, I felt eyes on me that were not like the others. She stood by the edge of the firelight, a girl not much older than me. Her hair was black as coal, falling in a rough tangle to her shoulders, and her eyes were darker still, sharp and watchful. Where I was pale and worn, she looked fierce, unblinking. She was the daughter of one of the leaders, and everyone in the camp treated her as something between a princess and a wild animal. They feared her temper as much as they respected her bloodline. I had seen her before, striding through the camp like she owned it, but she had never spoken to me. That night she finally did. I was carrying a pot of water, arms aching, when she sneered and asked, "What do you keep staring at the sky for? Think the stars will save you?" her words cut deeper than any whip. My first instinct was to lower my eyes and keep moving, but something in me rebelled. I set the pot down, lifted my chin, and answered, "The stars remind me that darkness never wins. They always return." For a moment she just stared, her head tilted as if I had spoken a language she didn't know. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed, not cruelly, but with a spark of curiosity. "Strange little star girl," she muttered, and walked away. After that night, she kept appearing. Sometimes she would linger near while I worked, pretending not to watch me. Sometimes she would throw another question, mocking but not entirely unkind. And sometimes, late when the camp grew still, she would wander close to where I sat gazing upward. She would roll her eyes and say, "Still talking to your stars," but she never walked away quickly. Her name, I learned, was Ravenna. Fitting, black-haired, dark-eyed, quick as a raven's shadow. She was everything I was not, bold where I was cautious, sharp where I was gentle, reckless where I was careful. She was the fire to my quiet starlight. And though she hid it at first, I began to see that my story stirred something in her, a curiosity she could not admit. We spoke more, though always in secret. She never let others see her talking to me. I was still an outsider, and her father would never have approved. Yet the more we spoke, the more I felt that the stars had sent her to me, not as an enemy, but as a mirror, a shadow sister. It was the first time since my capture that I felt less alone. For the first time, the stars I whispered to at night had given me an answer, and that answer was Ravenna. Ravenna and I began as shadows circling each other, she, fierce and mocking, and I, too stubborn to bow. But after that first exchange beneath the red dusk, something changed. She lingered more often near me, pretending she was there by chance. I caught her eyes when I sat alone at night, whispering to the stars, and though she always rolled hers, she never walked away. We began to speak in fragments, stolen words between chores, short whispers in the quiet of dawn. She teased me for my softness, my faith in lights above, and I teased her for her pride, for the way she pretended not to care. "You're strange," she would say, her lips curling into a smirk. "Who believes in stars?" "I do," I would answer. "And one day, maybe you will too." Her laugh was sharp, but there was always a pause after, as though some part of her wondered. Slowly, the pauses grew longer, the mocking less cruel. I began to see her not only as the daughter of a bandit, but as a girl like me, trapped in a world she did not choose, living under the shadow of her father. We became careful friends. We shared stories by the dying fires, sometimes sitting so close our shoulders touched. I told her of my brother, of Thomas and his fear of the dark, of how I had shown him the constellations to keep him brave. Her dark eyes softened when she listened, though she never admitted it. She told me of her father's cruelty, of the weight of his expectations, of the loneliness hidden beneath her sharp tongue. But it was a friendship built on secrecy. Ravenna warned me never to speak of it aloud, never to let the others see. "He would never allow it," she whispered once, her voice low with fear. I believed her. I could feel her heart race when we hid in the shadows to talk, as if even the stars might betray us. I thought we were careful. I thought we were invisible. But nothing remained hidden for long in that camp. One evening, her father saw us together. He was a man of iron, with eyes like a blade and a temper sharper still. He caught the way Ravenna lingered by me, the way she tilted her head to listen as I pointed at the sky. His face hardened. I thought he would strike me, or worse, drag me into the darkness. Instead, he said words I did not expect. "This girl has fire in her. She is worth more than a servant." From that day forward, I was no longer just the outsider, the stolen child who carried buckets and cleaned boots. Ravenna's father pulled me from the dirt and set me closer to his own daughter. I was still not one of them, not truly, but I was no longer a ghost. Ravenna looked at me that night, her dark eyes flickering in the firelight, and whispered, "Now you're truly mine." I did not yet understand how those words would shape the years to come. The years that followed hardened me more than I ever thought possible. When I was first dragged into that camp, I was only a frightened child, clinging to memories of home. But time has a way of burning softness out of you, the way the desert sun bleaches bones white. At first, I was still given the lowest tasks, hauling water, carrying wood, scrubbing pots. I worked until my hands bled and my shoulders ached. But I learned quickly, faster than they expected. I studied everything: how they cared for their horses, how they cleaned their rifles, how they tracked paths in the dust. I listened to every command, every curse, every laugh that echoed around the fire. And though they saw me as an outsider, I quietly wove myself into their world. I grew. My legs became stronger, my back straighter, my hands tougher. The girl who once stumbled under a bucket of water could now carry two without slowing her step. The child who cried in the dirt learned to hold her tears, even when exhaustion burned in her chest. And slowly, I began to notice something in their eyes, not pity, not contempt, but something sharper. Respect. Respect was rare among bandits. They valued strength, cleverness, endurance, nothing else. And though I had none of their blood, none of their name, I had a stubborn will. That was enough to make them look at me differently. It was Ravenna, more than anyone, who pushed me. She teased, she challenged, she provoked. "You're too soft," she would say, dark eyes glittering with mischief. "You'll break." But when I proved her wrong, when I matched her in a race across the desert path or endured a chore longer than she could, she grinned. "Maybe you're one of us after all." I did not know whether to feel proud or afraid. Part of me hated the idea of belonging here. This was the camp that had torn me from my family. And yet, belonging gave me freedom. I was no longer watched like a prisoner. I could walk where I wished, speak more freely, even decide which tasks to take on. I had carved out a place, and in the harsh language of bandits, that was survival. By the time I was old enough to be called a young woman, I had become more than just a stolen child. I was someone they counted on. When supplies ran low, I organized their stores. When tempers flared, I cooled them with reason. When danger loomed, I stood ready beside Ravenna, my dark-eyed shadow sister, who had become my fiercest companion. I was no longer only Astria, the sheriff's lost daughter. I was Astria of the desert, a girl who had bled and endured until even the ruthless bent their heads to acknowledge her. And yet, even then, when I sat beneath the endless night sky, I whispered to the stars as I always had. They were the only ones who knew the truth. No matter how much I adapted, a piece of me remained that little girl who once held her brother's hand and promised him the night was not to be feared. By the time I was nearly grown, Ravenna was no longer only a girl who mocked me for staring at the sky. She had become something far greater, my other half in a world where halves were rarely allowed to exist. She was fire, wild and unrestrained. Her black hair flew behind her when she rode, her dark eyes sharp as knives, her laughter loud and reckless. She lived as if the desert itself had chosen her to be its daughter, untamed, bold, quick to bite. I was her opposite, quiet, deliberate, cautious where she was reckless. My blonde hair and pale skin set me apart even in the camp, but it was not only appearance. Where Ravenna leapt without thought, I planned. Where she provoked, I soothed. Together we were storm and starlight, flame and calm, and together we were stronger than either of us alone. We were called sisters, though not by blood. Bandits muttered about our closeness, but none dared challenge it. In raids, Ravenna rode in front, fierce and daring, while I guided from behind, steady and watchful. Around the fire, she cracked jokes that made the men roar, while I organized supplies and whispered reminders of what must be done. When tempers flared, she threw sparks, I cooled them down. We were balance, though the camp would never call it that. At night, when the desert lay quiet, we shared truths no one else knew. Ravenna admitted she sometimes envied me, my patience, my unshakable belief in the stars. "You look at them like they're your family," she said once, her voice softer than I'd ever heard. "I don't even know what family means anymore." "You have me," I told her. And I meant it. She gave me back something too. Her fire burned away my fear. She forced me into risks I never would have dared, racing horses across cliffs, stealing fruit from wagons, swimming in rivers swollen with rain. She laughed at my hesitations until I laughed too. She reminded me that life, even here, could be lived, not only endured. People whispered that we were strange. That Ravenna's sharpness had softened, and that my silence had gained an edge. They didn't understand, or maybe they did. We had found in each other what the desert rarely gave, trust. We grew into it slowly, then suddenly, until one day I realized there was no version of my life in which Ravenna did not walk beside me. She was my sister not by blood, but by choice, and in the harsh language of the desert, that was stronger. And when I turned my eyes to the stars, she no longer mocked me. She sat beside me in silence, her dark eyes reflecting the same sky, as if she too had begun to believe there was something more in those lights. Together, we were no longer children of chance or chains. We were sisters of the desert. I was 16 when they gave me the horse. By then, I had lived half my life among the bandits. My hands had grown strong, my voice steady, my back unbent despite the weight of all I had endured. I was no longer a frightened child dragged into the dust. I had become something else, one of them, yet still apart, a flame carried into their dark world. It was Ravenna's father who led me into the corral that morning. Around us, the camp had gathered, rough faces watching with something like approval. "She's earned it," he said, though his eyes stayed sharp, as if he dared me to refuse. "This one's yours." The horse was black as midnight, its mane wild and shining, its eyes glowing like coals in the firelight. It stamped the earth, impatient, untamed. I reached out slowly, my palm brushing its flank, and it did not flinch. For a moment I saw myself reflected in that restless power, stolen, beaten, forced to bend, yet never broken. When I swung onto its back, barefoot and breathless, the bandits cheered. Ravenna laughed loudest of all, riding up beside me on her chestnut mare. "Now you're truly one of us," she shouted over the thundering hooves as we raced across the sand. And though I smiled, a part of me ached at her words. For if I was truly one of them, who was I to the family I had lost? That night, I sat with Ravenna on a rocky ledge above the camp. The stars burned brighter than I had ever seen, scattered across the desert sky. She leaned back, her black hair spilling like ink, her eyes glinting with mischief. "If the stars are your family," she teased, "does that make me your sister too?" I looked at her and nodded. "Yes. You are my sister." She said nothing more, but she smiled. Life among them was harsh, but I had carved out a place of honor. They trusted me, respected me, even sought my counsel. I was no longer a prisoner, no longer a servant. I was Astrea of the desert, rider of the black horse, sister to Ravenna. And yet, the stars still whispered of another life. Sometimes, when I closed my eyes, I saw Thomas's face, his hand clutching mine, his voice asking if the stars would watch over him. Sometimes I dreamed of my mother's call, of my father's heavy steps, of a town that might still remember my name. One evening, as the black horse carried me across the ridges, I looked back toward the land where I was born. The town that had once been my home lay hidden beyond the dunes, perhaps in ruins, perhaps alive. I did not know. But I felt the pull of it, sharp and deep, like a thread of light tugging me through the dark. I had become a legend in their camp, strong, respected, free. But I was also a shadow in the world I had left behind. Someday, I knew, I would return. Not as the child who had been stolen, but as the woman the desert had shaped. And when I did, I wondered if they would recognize me at all, or if I would only be a rider on the horizon, a ghost with hair pale as starlight, eyes burning like the night sky.